Hey guys, I just wanted to make a follow-up video to my last Instagram TV video, the one in regards to hip health. So I had quite a few questions and I figured the best way to answer all of them was just to make another video. So first question was, what is closing angle versus open angle joint pain or dysfunction? So an example of that would be, since we're looking at the hip, we'll stick with that. If I'm flat on my back and I bring my leg up towards the ceiling, the opening angle would be this angle here. And I should feel a stretch on the backside of my hip or the backside of my thigh. If I feel anything on the closing angle, which is this side, the angle that's closing, that's not normal. I shouldn't feel any pain or pinching in the hip. What I should feel is a stretch on the backside of the hip. So again, opening angle, closing angle. Any pain or pinching is not normal on the front side of the hip. So next question would be, what do I do if I feel pain or pinching in the hip? And my best answer would be, go find a professional that could do what's specific to you. But if you're trying to play around and figure things out on your own, you're going to find a way to create space on the back side of your hip. So anytime you have a closing angle, pain or pinch, usually the problem is on the other side of the joint. This being the posterior capsule of the joint, which is why I started with the pigeon stretch in my last video. So find a position that you can create that stretch on the back side of the hip without also having a pain or pinch on the front side of the hip. So you might have to play around with angles. So like we talked about the first video when I was on the ground, we're going to do the same thing on the table. So if this is too intense for me, I can change the angle. I can add a wedge. I can add 2 wedges. I can even stand up a little bit taller, okay? Whatever I can do to create that stretch on the back side or lateral side of my glute is where I want to find a position that's comfortable, but is also going to create some change on the hip without bringing it through pain. So the taller I am, the less hip flexion I need to get in this position. The more blocks I add, the less hip external rotation I need to get into the position. So for some people, it might look like this. For some, it might look like this. I'm deeper into hip flexion. For some people, it might look like this, deeper into hip flexion with less external rotation. But the intent is to create space on the backside of the hip capsule. And why is space important? Space is a prerequisite to any single movement. So before we start doing fancy things, like we were doing earlier in the other video, like hip internal rotation, which is also very important, where I was doing these ones, we might want to address the space of the hip first, like we just did, and breathing. We can't neglect breathing because our diaphragm is a muscle, just like other muscles in our body, that needs to be engaged. And there's a relationship between our ribs and our pelvis. So if you know anything about PRI, they call this the zone of apposition. So the better I am at engaging my anterior core, my front side of my core, the more it's going to change the relationship of my hip in the hip capsule. So it would be foolish to neglect breathing tactics. We're not going to get too far into that. Likewise, we are not married to specific positions. So if 90-90 hip internal rotation is too intense for various reasons, you need a certain degree of hip extension, you need a certain degree of hip abduction, and you need a certain degree of hip internal rotation in this specific position. So what we would do is maybe find a way to get hip internal rotation that's different, and it doesn't have to be this. So whether I'm on a box, plyo box would work better, and I'm here, and I'm keeping my belly nice and tight, and I'm driving into the table while trying to internally rotate, that's another way to get hip internal rotation. Find angles and positions that are specific to you that you can be successful in. They don't have to be the ones I showed you, but they do have to be positions where you're not getting pain and pinching. Likewise, if you are getting pain and pinching, play with the ranges of motion that you have available to you. So if you can get in that quadruped hip position that we're talking about, where we do our CARs, our controlled articular rotations, and you can draw a circle this big without getting any pain or pinching, allow that to be the range of motion that you work on. You're still giving feedback to your central nervous system, and you're still creating force in the hip capsule. If you have more available range of motion that's pain-free, make a bigger circle. So, like I said, we're not married to movements. We're married to staying away from pain. Because the more we train pain, the better we get at getting a pain response And that's something we don't want. Because when you are getting pain responses, all you're doing is allowing afferent feedback to be invited into your nervous system or your brain, and you're allowing yourself to train pain and become better at that. So just like we get better at playing basketball by playing basketball, or we get better at reading from reading or whatever, our brain gets better at recognizing pain responses. So never push through pain, never push through dysfunction, find positions with the same intent. If the intent is hip internal rotation, find a position where you can succeed in hip internal rotation without pain.